Roger Boy's Meltdown Iceland, Lessons on the World Financial Crisis from a Small Bankrupt Island. In the book Meltdown Iceland, Roger Boys dives into the economic recession of 2008, unfolding how it began in the subpolar Iceland. The author illustrates the country's rapid push for globalization under leaders like Prime Minister David Oddsson and the fatal decisions that led to its downfall. The summary explores Iceland's social structure, the forces behind privatization, aggressive bank policies, and the devastating consequences faced by its citizens. By unraveling the events that unfolded in the small island nation, the book offers invaluable lessons on the world financial crisis.
Iceland's economic tragedy. In 2008, Iceland faced an economic recession that started a worldwide trend, becoming the first country to succumb to it. The nation's small size and lack of resources made it unprepared to fight back. Iceland could have resolved the crisis with only $20 billion, but it didn't have the money, leading to a devastating national crisis that tore through its citizens, financial institutions, and fundamental Nordic culture. The crisis became apparent when the Prime Minister announced the verge of bankruptcy, stunning the country. The primary reason behind the economic collapse was greed, incompetence, feuding, revenge, and deceit, which caused Icelanders to acquire unsecured loans out of newfound wealth after embracing globalization. Iceland's default destroyed its credit rating, causing an economic tailspin that linked the country to the financial decline in world markets. Other tax haven countries, such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, were also deeply injured. Iceland's privatization journey. Iceland's tight-knit society underwent a drastic change during Prime Minister David Oddsson's administration, where he implemented privatization measures that were well received by the nation's powerful mercantile families. His first move was to sell a state fishing business, which began privatization across the country's various sectors. Oddsson reduced the corporate tax rate, liberalized the currency, and privatized multiple state companies, including investment banks and two other large state banks. This journey towards privatization was marked by power struggles between two groups who challenged each other for control, leading to large political contributions by these banks to avoid regulatory oversight. The book's message highlights a microcosm of what was happening in complex societies worldwide. Clash of the Titans. Iceland's privatization created cultural and political clashes between the newly minted oligarchs, called Orcus, and the nationalistic Octopus Group. The Orcus used cronyism and other tactics to buy up companies being privatized. This led to Iceland's banks accounting for 96% of its GDP with borrowed money propelling their expansion. Meanwhile, a new entrepreneur John Asgeir Johannesson, the son of a grocer, challenged Iceland's then-leader, Oddsson, for power. As the feud between them simmered, Parliament passed laws restricting ownership of broadcasting companies under specific conditions that many believed existed specifically to prevent Asgeir from mounting a political challenge against Oddsson and his Independence Party. With the mechanical workings of capitalism threatened, the privatization plans only half accomplished, and Iceland's banks growing dangerously fast, Oddsson and his central bankers failed to act. Iceland's fall. How Iceland's government and banks strayed and led the nation into an economic crisis. Iceland's economy was once thriving, but in a few years, it collapsed, leaving the country in debt. Privatizing the banks was one way to modernize the economy, but it went too far. The government under Oddsson initiated projects, including hydroelectric dams and aluminum smelting plants, to make better use of its natural resources. The government also encouraged the banks to extend credit easily, which led to the creation of incredibly large banks. Soon, they started entering the international market, expanding aggressively. People bought houses and cars they couldn't afford, and the bank stocks rose high. However, this trend did not last long. Iceland's banks had little exposure to U.S. mortgages, but their domestic house loans brought warnings from Denmark and Britain. In 2006, when Japan's interest rate increased, Iceland's investors sold their shares, which critically damaged the banks. Although parliamentary investigations found that the local authorities were responsible for poor financial judgment, British taxpayers had to assume their own losses. The Icelandic banks failed, leading to an economic crisis that affected the nation. As a result, frozen funds from Iceland were treated as terrorism, prompting the tension between Iceland and the UK. After a tough time, these two nations agreed on a plan to repay UK depositors. In conclusion, Iceland's rapid modernization and greed led to the country's economic crisis. The government's plan to diversify the ownership and make Iceland a nation of shareholders and the bank's overextension and exotic products led the nation into the unexpected economic downturn. Iceland's fall, the consequences of ignoring expert warnings. During Oddson's tenure as Prime Minister and Central Bank Governor, Iceland refused to join the European Monetary Union despite warnings from economists like Joseph Stiglitz, who foresaw an economic crisis ahead. The government ignored critics' warnings about the growing bubble and the central bank's lack of foreign currency reserves, leading to the country's bankruptcy. The aftermath saw Iceland nationalizing its banks and seeking aid from Russia to stay afloat. The crisis led to the ousting of the existing government, and Iceland became the first country to chase its government out of power. More than 50,000 people lost their savings, and protests led to early elections, resulting in the formation of a new interim government led by Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir. She called for joining the EU and restoring the country's traditional values.
As the first nation to succumb to the financial crisis, Iceland's experience serves as a cautionary tale for other countries. Boy's book demonstrates that Iceland's push for globalization and subsequent privatization led to unsustainable growth, driven by greed, incompetence, and political feuds. The aggressive policies adopted by the banks, and the neglect from leaders, eventually resulted in about 85% of the banking system's failure and a national crisis. Though the country has made strides in recovery in recent years, lessons from Iceland's history hold immense significance for the global financial landscape.